Today I'm going to take a single can and make a simple hobo stove. Follow along. Well, I found this big rock. This would be a great place to cook our lunch. I can set up my little can stove right here and not have to worry about burning anything down. Although everything's wet. It rained last night, so finding tinder was going to be a chore. So during my hike, I found a pine tree and broke some of the dead branches off the bottom of the tree. They're nice and dry, so we've got plenty of firewood to get our fire going. But first, we need to empty this can, and then we'll get working on building our stove. Well, I brought a can of SpaghettiOs with me today because I like to eat super healthy when I go for hikes. And what we're gonna do to get started, I brought my mess kit. Now, normally I would bring a stove with me, a cook stove. Here in Connecticut, we can't have open fires. In the woods, this is my property. I could do it if I wanted to, but just to kind of show cooking using a stove and doing it the correct way if you're not on your own property. In my cook kit, I normally have everything I need, but let's just pretend that I only have the basics. I forgot to pack a few things. So I've got my pot, some utensils, and my can of SpaghettiOs here. So the first thing we're gonna do is open that can, and I'm gonna dump that into my pot. And let me get my spoon out. Make sure to scrape all of those. Okay. After the can is empty, the next thing I'm going to do is peel the label off, and I'm going to want to keep this label because I'm going to use the paper to help get my fire started. So this right here we're going to keep. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to fill this can with dirt and kind of just clean it out with dirt, dump it out, and that'll dry out the can. The other thing that we need to do to prepare it as well is, and actually we'll do it after we build the stove, sometimes the inside of these cans are lined. They put some kind of a Teflon or some kind of a coating in here to line them. This one doesn't look lined, but we're going to be safe anyway. So before we cook our stove, we cook our lunch on the stove, we're going to do a pre-burn, burn off anything that may be inside here so that we know we're not putting off any noxious gases or smoke that's going to interfere with our cooking. So let me get this cleaned out. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you the process, and then we'll get cutting. I'm just going to use a knife to make this stove. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take my can and just shove some leaves in here. Get a stick so as not to cut my finger on the edge of the can, and just kind of swirl those leaves around. There we go. Whoop. Should have found a better stick. There we go. Okay. And with all of that done, I should be able to pull these leaves out now. And there's some leaf bits in there, but all that spaghetti sauce and spaghetti-o goodness is gone. So I'm not going to get too gross trying to work on this thing. So let's get cutting. Okay, you're going to want to be really careful when you do this, but this is like an emergency, on the fly. If this is something that I want to make as a permanent stove for me to use all the time, I'd use better tools, but because this is all I've got, I'm just going to take out my knife. I'm going to stab into the can. Make a couple cuts like that, and I'm going to fold this first tab out like that. This is going to be the top of the can, and because I'm putting my pan over the top, it needs to breathe. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 4 of those all the way around. And you know, depending on your knife, this really shouldn't be too difficult a task. I've made this type of stove in the past. They work great. But this is a type of stove, you use it, you do what you need to do, you can pack it out with you, and then when you're done with it, throw it in the recycling, get rid of it, and you can make another one if you need to. Like I said, if you like the stove and you want to make a more permanent one, don't do it this way. It's a great way to get tetanus. After you use this once and it gets hot, it's just gonna rust, and the rust is gonna make it so that you're not gonna want to get cut on a rusty old can. So okay, so now that I have those vents cut, I'm also gonna cut a little door here in the front that I can feed my wood into. I'll make that a little bit bigger just because I don't want to have to struggle getting wood into this thing. Okay. Now what this will do for us, this door, is it opens up at the bottom so we have airflow coming in, so everything at the bottom of our can burn. It also gives me this little ledge so I can put sticks in that are longer than the can, and as they burn I can just push them in a little bit further. So another thing that you may want to do is pop a few holes, and it doesn't have to be pretty. I'm just gonna cut some little X's around the bottom. And that's just going to give me a little extra airflow. But anyway, this is my down and dirty Hobo stove. Let's load it up with wood. We'll do an initial burn on it just to get rid of any kind of a lining that's in here out. And then we'll put our SpaghettiOs on top and have some lunch. Okay, although this looks a little tilty, that's the camera. I'm actually very level. I'm gonna move this paper out of the way. I broke up all my little pieces of firewood. And what I love about this style of stove, I also made a reburner stove in a past video. I make all sorts of little stoves. I have alcohol stoves, and I have propane stoves. But my preference, at least where we live, are wood stoves, because for this small amount of wood, I mean literally a couple of small branches and some pine needles, I have more than enough wood to burn this in, and still enough to then cook my lunch. So for solo camping, this is for me the way to go. But anyway, let me get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to line the bottom of my stove here with some pine needles. And what that's for, in case there's still a little bit of dampness down here, any wood that catches and falls in isn't gonna just lay there in a puddle. It'll eventually evaporate and cook all that stuff off, but just to give it a good head start, I'm gonna throw some pine needles in here. Okay, and then I carry with me on most knife kits that I have, I carry a little tinder box. They're usually made out of an Altoids tin or Secrets or whatever. I pop a little hole in it so that way I can also use this tin to make char cloth. So if you like making fires using flint and steel, you have to have some kind of a char material. This box is great for making char material, whether it's made out of cloth or whatever. What I've got here is some tinder. This is just like a sisal that's been ripped up. I'll throw that in the bottom. And that little piece is probably more than enough. And then I'll take my ferricium rod and my knife, and don't scream at me because I'm using the blade end, but this has to be reprofiled anyway. So I'm just going to drop some ash, directly into my can. Of course, I'm making a video, that's why it took so many strikes. But once we get that going, I'm going to take the little pieces here and we'll throw some of those on top. I'll use a bigger stick to kind of manage my fire. And once that gets going, we'll move to the next size up of sticks. We'll throw those in. I never even used my paper. You know what, I'll just wad it up and throw it in there now anyway. Okay, and then once we get enough of these smaller pieces burnt up, I'll move to the larger pieces. And those we're going to start feeding in right here at the bottom, just like this. And that's what's going to keep our fire going. And as it burns down, you'll see these start to burn. I'll just push them in a little bit further, and then we'll add a few more. And we'll get that fire going. Once it looks like it's really burnt in, I'll see the can discoloring. Once it's really discolored and it's not putting off that much smoke, I'm going to say it's probably safe to cook in at that point. Any kind of plastics that are in here are burnt out, and I'm ready to put my pan on top. And I'll bring it back once we're at that point. Okay, I think our stove is at that point. It's been burning now for about maybe 5 minutes. So I'm going to take our SpaghettiOs here, which are good cold, just as good as they're hot, but just to kind of show off our video, I'll get that covered. It's going to smoke a little bit just because we've got some wet fire hitting the bottom of that pot, so it's going to smoke a little bit. Eventually that'll stop. But this should take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to heat up our SpaghettiOs so that they're not quite boiling. I don't want to have to scrub my pan out to clean it. But until they're nice and hot, I'll simmer. Throw a little bit more wood down here. And if it looks like I need a little bit more air, I can just give it a little blow like that, and that'll get the fire going again. All right, so let's give it a few minutes. We'll come back and check and see how lunch is coming, and we'll talk about this stove a little bit. Let's see what we've got. Okay, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but We've got a rolling bubble. I don't want to call it a boil, but definitely simmering. So I'm going to take this off the heat so I don't burn it to the bottom of the pan. And I'm just going to let the rest of this wood here burn. I didn't quite use everything that we broke up. I probably shoved a lot more in there than I needed to, and I threw away most of the pine needles. Didn't really need those. But that's pretty efficient for a little stove like this. Like I said, we'll just let it burn off. Probably take another 3 or 4 minutes for all this to burn out. And then it'll take maybe another 5 minutes for the can to be cool enough to touch. And then I'm gonna let this cool down before I try to eat it. We'll have some lunch and we'll talk about our stove. Well, it did the job it needed to do. Pretty ugly as far as the stove goes, but you know, if you were to want to make something like this a little bit more permanent, the little door can fold shut if you're not using it, so it's easier to pack away. And these little flaps that I cut, you could always tuck those in instead of popping them out. I just made it to serve a purpose. I'm gonna crush it and I'm gonna throw it in my recycling when I get back. I really don't care. It takes 2 seconds to make one of these, and I didn't have to bring a can with me to make a stove. I just used my lunch to make my stove. Hobo stoves have been around forever, and there's 100 different varieties of them. It can be as simple as just a can with a bunch of holes popped in it that you burn wood that's fed from the top. It could be big, it can be small. But you'll find a ton of these things online. I like making little can stoves like this. They're convenient, they're easy. They made my lunch for me today. So I'll have my SpaghettiOs, and they didn't burn to the bottom of the pot, so that's always a plus. Just like homemade. Anyway. If you like making stuff like this, hobo stoves, if you like playing in the woods, if you want to see any other stoves, any other types of stoves that I've made, leave a comment down in the bottom. If you want to tell us what your favorite wood cook stove is for in the woods, let us know down below, and share the information with the rest of the community so everybody can have more fun when they're playing out in the woods. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.